Hello, and welcome to Research the News. This week, we're talking about why researching the news is important. And as always, we're live, so there'll be no edits to the podcast. But this week, we're going to start out with something a little different, a monologue. Gretchen will be joining us soon. But for now, I'm just going to talk about why Research the News exists. So, why does the Research the News podcast exist? Now, if you look at our mission statement, we exist to have healthy dialogue with people of all backgrounds, promoting open discussions between people of differing viewpoints to research the news and search for truths. Now, that's our mission, but there's a reason why podcasts like this have to exist. And to me, it's media consolidation. Now, I'm going to go into some facts here. In 1983, 50 corporations controlled most of the American media. That was magazines, books, music, newspapers, movies, radio, and television. That is a tiny number for a country of over 300 million people. By 1992, that number was around 25 companies that controlled all of the media. And less than 10 years later, in 2000, that number was at 6. Now there's been some mergers, and these are the 5 media companies that control 90% of the media. Number 1, Time Warner, AT&T. Number 2, Disney. Number 3, Comcast, NBC Universal. Number 4, News Corp, which is Fox News. And number 5, Viacom and CBS. And on top of that, that's not including the Washington Post being owned by Jeff Bezos, or all of the Bloomberg channels and publications owned by Michael Bloomberg, the guy who spent over $500 million of his own money to buy his way into stage at the presidential debates, or even Warren Buffett owning around 70 daily newspapers. Now, I like Warren Buffett, but he shouldn't control 70 newspapers. So why does this all matter? There's a term called the Fourth Estate that's been used throughout history to describe the press. But what is the Fourth Estate, and why do they call it that? Traditionally in Europe, there were 3 groups who held most of the power, and specifically the top 2. There was the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners. The commoners being the ones who had, of course, the least amount of power. The press is supposed to be that 4th rung of power that holds the others in check, the government. But that's why journalism is important, and the best definition of journalism I've found is from the American Press Institute, who says, "The purpose of journalism is to provide citizens with the information they need to make the best decisions about their lives, their communities, their societies, and their governments." The press is supposed to inform us, not feed us propaganda to help their personal agendas. And just to be clear, this isn't an attack on the left or the right media. They're just 2 sides of the same coin. So I always like to learn from history, but we don't have to go back that far to see whether the source of opinion peddlers at MSNBC, CNN, or Fox News, if you're listening to them, you know it's going to be skewed. And the reason why? It's people like Bill O'Reilly and Rachel Maddow, who are the same person. They do the same things. Now, I know Bill O'Reilly is gone from Fox News and has been for years, but he's had some long-term effects. In 2003, Bill O'Reilly led the charge to rally Americans to support the Iraq War. Over and over again, he drilled it in our heads that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. And of course, we eventually found out that that wasn't true. And to be fair, he did apologize, kind of, and he actually did dress down Donald Rumsfeld in a show, but it was way too late. Because today, in 2021, 40% of all Americans and 51% of Republicans still believe that Saddam Hussein either probably or definitely had weapons of mass destruction. The damage was done by bad media. And today you have Rachel Maddow, who is now the number 1 news person in journalism, just like Bill O'Reilly was. She is diametrically opposed to the beliefs of Bill O'Reilly, but leads the cable ratings among liberals, just like O'Reilly led around conservatives. For weeks and months in the summer of 2020, she drilled it into viewers' heads that Russia was paying bounties to Taliban militants if they killed American soldiers. And on top of that, Trump knew about it and did nothing because collusion. If you watch her show, she loves that word. 39% of all Americans and 66% of Democrats believed that Trump knew that Russia was paying bounties to kill American soldiers going into the last election. Biden said it on the campaign trail repeatedly. And what do we find out this week? White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that after review of the classified reports, the intelligence community determined it had only low to moderate confidence in their authenticity. Not that they were true, just low confidence they were even authentic. And then she said it was due in part to the ways in which the intelligence was obtained, including from interrogations of Afghan detainees. Now, if you read through the lines, When they talk about interrogations, that probably means things like waterboarding that have proven to be ineffective at gathering factual intelligence. But it doesn't matter what's true anymore. Whether it's true or not, the damage has been done by bad media. So I'll say it again. Rachel Maddow, Bill O'Reilly are the same person. And we're all being shaped by these people, whether or not we watch mainstream news. The outcomes of this are people who go against core beliefs we as Americans should all be fighting for. I can't stress this enough. It wasn't long ago that we didn't have freedom of speech. And in fact, people fought for hundreds of years to get the freedom to say what they wanted without being jailed. That idea of freedom of speech has always been a rallying cry for liberals throughout history who are held back by tyrannical governments and monarchies. Look through the history of France, the history of America. They were revolutionaries, liberal revolutionaries. But now Facebook and Twitter are censoring conservatives, and many liberals are celebrating it. To be clear, the First Amendment doesn't cover private companies, but it's still shutting down speech. And many conservatives today continue to decry cancel culture while calling for boycotts of Major League Baseball and Coca-Cola. But to be clear, none of these people are classical liberals or classical conservatives. These are those people who are shaped by the media conglomerates, those 5 groups that control 90% of the media. They're the people who are believing the media hype. So when you watch the news today, it feels like we're all terrible people. This group hates that group, but when you break it down, they're just all made up groups. The media puts people into groups and then makes sure to let everyone know that the other groups are terrible people. If you're black, you have to hate police. If you're white, you should be afraid of people of color. If you're gay, just know that all Christians hate you. And if you're a gun owner, you're okay with school shootings. And if you're a straight white male, you're the worst of the bunch. The truth is, there are bad people in all of the groups I just mentioned, but the number of good people in those groups outweigh the bad by an astronomical amount. But if we only focus on the bad, it seems overwhelming. And that's what the media is there to do. So we need to stop idolizing media commentators and political candidates that promote these fallacies, because all it does is lead to more people who are far left and far right and unable to have rational conversations about the real issues we face. So to wrap up, in 1891, the Irish poet and playwright Oscar Wilde wrote, "In old days, men had the rack, which was a torture device. Now they have the press. That is an improvement, certainly, but still it is very bad and wrong and demoralizing. Somebody called journalism the fourth estate. That was true at the time, no doubt, but at the present moment, it is the only estate. It has eaten up the other 3. The Lords temporal say nothing, the Lords spiritual have nothing to say, and the House of Commons has nothing to say and says it. We are dominated by journalism." This was 130 years ago. And it's important to note that Oscar Wilde was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor for being gay. But he said this years before he was put in jail. His trial was considered one of the first celebrity trials. It was a big news event, and the press was a big part of why he went to jail, simply for being gay. The press, the fourth estate, can come for anyone, but right now they are sending us after each other, and we need to stand up and say, this is not all right. Only 41% of Americans say they trust the media. So my question is, why do we keep blindly following their narrative? Hey, Gretchen, how are you?
Hi, Ray. How's it going?
Good. I got a little bit emotional there, I think. I feel like I
Yeah.
wasn't expecting that, but talking through it, it's after seeing everything that's been happening this week and just everything that's been happening for a long time, it just I don't know why. Why do we keep blindly following the narratives that are put on our plate? So that's what I want to talk about today. Is that what
Yeah.
you want to talk about today?
Yeah. I thought you
Good.
actually really talked about all of the key elements of what's going on, but really focused on that we all want the same things and we all really do. The good people do outweigh the bad. And I think, we made the little saying of if it bleeds, it leads for the media. And it really is true. Yeah, I think one of the things that we kind of have to remember is that they're all about ratings. They're all about making money. These are for-profit companies. So when you're consuming media, you have to have that in the back of your head.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And I think that's been bothering me for a long time. That's why I started this. And I think that's what we want to talk about today. And just as you follow along, all those facts and all of those things I talked about, feel free to look them up on researchthenews.com. We did get rid of all of the other sites. They're not all gone. They're just all pointing now to researchthenews.com. So we have one source. I was getting some people who were telling me that we wanted them in one place. So we did that. All of the links are on there. And anything else we talk about today will be posted up on the website, so feel free to check that out. And today, I guess before we get started on our topic, which we've already kind of got started, let's go back to the good old what's your bias? So we all have them. When we talk about the media and when we talk about in general where our biases lie, I think people who have listened for a while know where we come from, but let's just give the quick overview. And Gretchen, I'll let you go first here. And what's your bias when it comes to media, news, politics, however you want to take it?
Yeah. I used to be very, very left leaning when it came to my news consumption. I really just watched MSNBC. I loved Rachel Maddow. I actually had a girl crush.
Yeah.
I had a total girl crush on Rachel Maddow.
I never had a guy crush on Bill O'Reilly, just to be clear. I've never, that's
No,
not a feeling that, yeah. So maybe they're not exactly the same, like I said, but go
I
ahead.
don't
I'm
even
sorry.
know anybody who might have a crush on him in general.
I don't want to put
No
him
offense,
down.
Bill. No offense, Bill.
He's in retirement now, so just let him enjoy his retirement. Anyway.
But yeah, I really did just consume things that were with my leftist view. It got to the point where I got bored with it, quite honestly. And I mean, Rachel specifically, it just became talking for 25 minutes about one thing. And it got, I felt like I wasn't spending my time appropriately and it wasn't informing me in any way. I never saw myself as somebody that was like one of those angry people that like would get really, really upset and pontificate. I know that when it came to social media, that probably was not the case for a lot of my viewers. Just like I see for a lot of my friends right now when they go on rants on Facebook, which I think is a part of the conversation too. We tend to do and say things on social media that we would not do in normal everyday life, which I think every person that kind of is like me probably has gone through ebbs and flows of moments in their life when they're like, why did I post that?
Yep.
But I think for me as it is now, probably over the last 7 years, and part of my bias really came from not having money to pay for cable, and so I stopped watching all of the big news
Everyone
networks.
should stop giving money to cable. So I think you're on the right track. Yeah. I think it's a good plan.
I couldn't justify spending the money, and going through the divorce and everything. I really had to start paying attention to where my money was going to make it so that I could afford life. And I realized that there were things in my life that were way more important to me. So, so I decided to get rid of cable, and I started listening to podcasts. And that was when I was listening to Rachel on podcasts, but then I started listening to more NPR and PBS and BBC, and I was noticing that I enjoyed more just being informed. We were actually, Ray and I were talking earlier about like how to, and we're probably going to get into it later. And I do listen to very liberal podcast, but I feel like it is more of the seasoning on top of my entree of news consumption rather than the only thing I listen to. And I think that might be, I'm proud of that is where my bias has gone. I'm still very liberal and I still enjoy that podcast because it is in alignment with the things that I do believe and how I live my life. So, but that's really where my bias is now and how it's changed over the last about 7 years.
I like all of what you said there, and I think it's funny because I get very frustrated. I tend to be conservative for people who haven't listened to the show before. And when I say that, that's a gross generalization. When it comes to fiscal conservatism, I definitely am. But I'm also, again, I go back to traditional conservative, not what we've become as a
Mm.
Republican Party or really anyone that's in public office. It's all about buying votes at this point. I'm more about spending money wisely. Socially, I'm pretty libertarian, which again, that's I didn't realize how bad the libertarian viewpoints have. Now people hate libertarians. Everyone hates everyone. I'm just so tired of it. But
Yeah, it just yeah.
apparently libertarians are very they if you listen to people on Twitter, libertarians only care about liberties when it affects them, which is not the case for people who are true libertarians. So I'm saying classical libertarian when it comes to my social beliefs, and fiscally, I tend to be fairly conservative. But in the sense of one of the things that you said that I've joked around about before, you'll say things like, because I'm a liberal, I care about people. And it always, you don't do it on purpose. And I know you personally, so I don't take any offense to it. But I've heard that from people who use it as kind of a downplaying or a mocking of conservatives.
Oh,
And
yeah.
for me, I think like it's funny because you said, what I believe in and how I like to live my life is Rachel was why I listen to liberal podcasts. I
Mm.
would agree that basically when I listen to a liberal podcast, I go, yeah, that's how I want people to live. I want everyone to be have the same equality, have the same opportunities. And when I listen to conservative people who are not, let me be clear, this is not
Mm.
the Sean Hannity's, this is not the Joy Reids. These aren't the people who just cause problems. I'm talking about the people who are true conservatives and true liberals. They all want equality. And if they don't, I don't like them. So it's not about if you're conservative or liberal. It's about what are you actually saying. And I think that's the problem for me with media in general, is that
Hmm.
it's not about journalism anymore. It's about how you get more people to tune in and how you make
Hmm.
money and how you keep people on your side and build up this base of people who are going to support you. And that's the same with we could make that same comment about politicians the same way we
Oh,
make them about
sure.
journalists. But going back to just wrap up, I think the my bias towards journalism and what journalism should be is what I mentioned in my opening monologue there, which again, the purpose of journalism is to provide citizens with the information they need to make the best decisions about their lives, their communities, their societies, and their governments. That's what it should be about. It shouldn't be about people trying to change the shape politics. It shouldn't be
Mm.
about people trying to get certain politicians into office. It should be about here is the information about these people so you can make a wise decision. And that's when I enjoy people. I think the last thing I'll say in my bias is that I know you talked about how you didn't listen to much conservative viewpoints. I listen to viewpoints from all over the spectrum. But what I've found about myself is when there's a Republican in office, I have a hard time listening to CNN because nothing that
Mm.
Republican does is good. And people can talk about Trump, but this has been happening for a very long time. And when a Democrat's in office, I have a very hard time listening to Fox News, which is pretty much
Hmm.
the only mainstream conservative network because no matter what Biden does or whatever any liberal politician does, it's going to be bad. But there are journalists on all of the networks, and you and I had talked about this, and I look at someone like Chris Wallace, who's a journalist and did one of the debates. He is someone who plays it down the middle, and he is a very honest journalist, and he is not afraid
Hmm.
to ask the hard questions of Republicans or liberals. And he happens to be on Fox News, and a lot of people that are conservative hate him because it's like, well, you're not helping out our guy. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
liberals who are like, I hate Chris Wallace because he's on Fox News, so he must be the devil. And that is part of the entire problem. So
Sure.
that's the end of my rant. And now we want to get into some questions. So I'm going to start off with you. Now, you had said that some of your news consumption has changed since we started
Yeah.
this. So why did it change? Was it just because we're doing the podcast? I know you said like some of these things you found a little boring, but what was it about your consumption? Why did it change, and what is kind of
Yeah.
your MO
Well,
now?
it's kind of interesting. Okay, so I got I didn't have a Google Assistant or an Amazon Alexa. I have to be very careful when I say her name.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't have I didn't have either of those up until about a year and a half ago, and I've gotten into the habit of saying good morning to her every day. It started over quarantine because it was just nice to hear somebody go, "Good morning, Gretchen. Today's
Hmm.
weather is black." It's just nice, and I would just like ask her questions. Like that sounds really sad. I live
It's
alone.
quarantine time. Yeah, it was
And
quarantine time.
quarantine
So
time, yeah, made me kind of psycho. So I was kind of losing it, and so I actually, it's kind of funny. On my birthday, I actually started to cry because she's like, "Happy birthday, Gretchen," and I was like, "Ah," but
I was
so the
following up till that
mornings,
point, and then that's a little bit too much. But I'll look.
yeah,
I'm not
it
gonna
was
make fun of
a
you.
little weird moment. I called
Yeah.
my mom afterwards. I was like, "Oh, I think something's wrong." Um, but in the mornings, I would, say good morning, and she reads me the news. The thing I actually enjoyed about it is that it was just the news. Like
Mm.
there was no opinion. And the only time I would actually hear anything that had a bias to it really was when I would ask her to play NPR.
Mm.
And they would do specific stories about things, and we're all human, they're human too. Like you could hear in their line of questioning the things that they cared about. And but for the basic overview of the news, it was much more based on just what was happening at that moment, an interview with someone that was talking about what was happening at that moment. Or if they were on the street, they would interview somebody that was there. So it was very, very minimal, and it left me open to look into the things that I wanted to actually look into instead of, when you're watching. A couple times I actually got on CNN, and I have an app on my TV where I can actually watch CNN. And so I would turn it on, and I was like, I can't. I don't, this is boring to me. It's
Yeah.
just they're talking about the same thing for 45 minutes. It's like I don't need you to talk about it for 45 minutes. Just tell me what's happening and let's move on. Um so in that, good morning Google or whatever, the news outlets that would have their little blurbs in there were NPR, BBC, Bloomberg. I'm trying to think of the others. There, HuffPost used to be on the one for Alexa, but they stopped doing it. And then I would get the local news. So KDKA, for our Pittsburgh station, would do a little blurb on there too of local things that were happening.
Every single group you just mentioned, though, is still a media conglomerate except for NPR.
Yes,
And it's
yes,
crazy to me. I
yeah,
mean, even when you look at the local stations, that's the thing. When we talk about,
yeah.
I think KDK may be owned by Viacom corporate, but even if
I
not,
can't
there's still
remember.
like
Yeah,
one news station or one news organization owns a bunch of radio stations. And it's just
yeah.
everything you say, it's still
It's
like,
still
it's
all
still a
connected.
corporation. And so it's funny
Hmm.
because when you said, you don't hear a lot of bias in it, it's just telling you the news. I think that the only places I can find that anymore are some like the AP and
Yes,
Reuters, and I
yes, and
subscribe to them
Reuters. Yeah,
directly. I have their apps because they typically still follow journalism standards, but
yeah.
everyone has an agenda, and so sometimes it's weird because I think
Hmm.
if you would pull it out of context and maybe look from 20 years ago, I'm not saying that definitely would happen, but if you would have heard those headlines, you would think maybe those seem biased. But now everything is so biased that
Yeah.
when it's like, oh, it's just steering you one way or the other, it seems more normal. And
Hmm.
I think that's the part that makes it tough for me is when I read any article, I hear things and I immediately think, what's the actual story behind it? So when they
Mm.
say, even when I was looking up information about how many people believed that Iraq, Saddam Hussein
Yeah.
had weapons of mass destruction. It was so hard to find actual numbers. And if you looked at a
Mm.
conservative site, they would downplay the amount of conservatives who believed the now lie. And if you looked at a liberal site, they would say, Republicans still believe that there's weapons of mass destructions,
Mm.
not noting the fact that there were still a ton of liberals that believed that. And so even though they're putting out these fact-based articles, they're still clearly skewed in my mind, and that's kind of the problem I have. And I think you talked about, and one thing with an Alicia, as I call her, instead of the Alexa word, so then it doesn't activate them in my house.
That's good.
even with her, I mean, it's all about algorithms, and that's the same with
Yeah.
Google. That's the same with any search engine. And so, I've watched the documentary. If you haven't seen them yet, it's really good. There's QAnon Into the Void, I think it's called, but I watched. It's like a 5-part HBO series, and there was another one that we had talked about before about the news algorithms and what Facebook was doing.
Mm.
And if you look at the start of all these, it goes back to, if you're in QAnon, those people that are into QAnon, you watch one video and then YouTube and Facebook say, here are some more videos just like it, because they didn't
Hmm.
care that you were watching some crazy stuff that was going
Yeah.
to lead people to do some crazy things. They just wanted more eyes, more views, more money. And so it all
Jeez.
brought people into this place. And they ended up, now it's kind of interesting because there's all this pushback, and they got rid of all these QAnon sites and they're banning them. And
Hmm.
there are people that are standing up, even if they don't like the QAnon, they're standing up and saying that still, like, you're only taking down QAnon. And, what about Blue Anon? I feel like there's this whole, the left and right. I don't know if we've talked about this in the show before, but there's the horseshoe theory of politics, where the further left you go and the further right you go, everyone connects back. And I used to be able to look at a conspiracy theory on Facebook and be like, oh, that's one of my liberal friends, or that's one of my
Mm.
conservative friends. Now I have no idea who's who, because they all are just getting really crazy and people are looping back around. And it's like, y'all are complaining about the same things, the same overlords, whatever it is. And I can't tell the difference between my liberal conspiracy theorist friends and my conservative conspiracy theorist friends. But I mean, it scares me that, like, Alicia has become your source of news, even though it sounds good on the surface of, yeah, it's easy headlines. But the more you interact, the
Sure.
more you're going to start getting back into that trap. And I
Yeah.
think we
Well,
talked about this
luckily I
before,
just
but
asked her to like play Ariana Grande for me. So
there, that's a whole nother thing we should talk about sometime. Ariana Grande.
I enjoy pop music.
So did you ever buy a newspaper in your life, Gretchen? Like,
No.
actually pay for a
Actually, I
newspaper?
never.
No,
No.
never.
Well,
Really?
wait, pause. Yes, I have. When I was performing a lot, but it was just to get articles about myself.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
pretty vain. But yeah, that's all I would really do. Um, I will preface this when I lived in Pittsburgh from about 2003 till about 2005, 6-ish. And during that time, I was not political at all. I was not political all through college. It did not, I was not stimulated by politics. It actually, when I would hear people talk about politics, it just turned me off. I was not, it just, because I think part of it too is I hate confrontation. So people would get heated when they would talk about politics.
Mm.
And when I was in the one dance company that I was with, we had a guy in the company named Max, and I remember it was during the this would have been 2004 ish. It was that presidential election, and I remember him saying, "Are you going to vote?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Why?" I was like, "'Cause I don't know I don't know who to vote for." He's like, "How in the world do you not know who to vote for?" And I was like, "I'm not paying attention. I don't have any I don't have any opinion." And he really got mad at me.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment when I was like, "Oh," because I was just living my happy life. Mm, poor. I was super poor. I was working like 3 jobs, trying to, afford my studio apartment. Um, Working at Walmart and teaching dance classes and dancing with this company. And I really didn't see the world any bigger than my bubble that I was living in. And it was after that then I really started to pay attention, and started consuming media, but I really still wasn't buying newspapers and at that point I didn't even have a computer.
Mm.
I would just talk to friends and kind of get their gist of what was happening in the world, and
That's
then
like
and
the
I had
original
cable.
algorithm. That's yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't
And I
realize this
didn't even
before,
have
but the original algorithm was getting in a group of friends and having them tell
yeah.
you what to believe. So that was
Yeah,
before
and I
the
had
Facebooks.
local stations, and that was all my news. So, and I had insomnia pretty bad, so I would watch PBS and BBC a lot. So that's where I actually was getting my news, was PBS and BBC. Um, yeah.
I remember buying newspapers in high school, and that's the thing. It's kind of interesting. So the point of asking about that is that, I remember buying newspapers because I actually wanted to read the news. I wanted to see what was going
Yeah.
on. I also was a big fan of the Calvin and Hobbes comic strip. If you haven't watched it ever, or looked at it, feel free to go watch. It's one of the best comic strips ever. But I loved reading the news and trying to keep up to date, even in high school. And then, of course, now newspapers have shifted and there's almost no local press anymore.
Mm.
And we had talked about this earlier, where if a website asks us to pay money to read the news, it's
Oh,
like, no,
yeah.
it should be free. So instead, and I think this is most people, it's like, well, where is free news? It's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's YouTube. I can
Yeah.
go there and listen to all these people. And I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but the downfall of someone like Steven Crowder, who I think started out with he was one of the few conservative people who seemed to be, he had some funny things. He was provocative, but didn't cross any lines. And now he, in order to keep views up, has gone down this like far right racist
Oh.
commentary that's just so sad to watch. And I
Hmm.
think there's always these times where you see it in your own news when you're watching it, and it gets further and further left and further right if you start reading
Hmm.
those kind of articles. But the people and the sources of the news are doing the same thing, and I think that starts at the top with these corporations. And I think I just don't understand how we can look at 5 companies controlling that much of the media and thinking it's okay. And I'm not someone who
Right.
thinks that billionaires should not exist and they're terrible people by nature. I think Warren Buffett seems like a really great guy who's going all
Hmm.
his money. He's already promised to give back. So even though he's made all these billions, and I'm sure he's really enjoying his life, he's giving them all back, and he's done a lot of charitable things, and that's great. But he
Yeah.
owns 70 newspapers. And so
Yeah.
which one of those newspapers are going to write a bad story about him? And Jeff Bezos controls one of the biggest newspapers in the country, if not the biggest. And they aren't going to write anything bad about Amazon. And so
Mm-mm.
I have a real problem with this kind of system. And I think there used to be, are you familiar with the even something like the Fair Time Act? I forget what it's called now. It's the Fair
Oh.
Time Act, where basically you had each side had to have the same amount of time on air.
Yeah.
So that was taken down by Ronald Reagan, which was part of the whole impetus for so many of these conglomerations and all these corporations to break down. So if you look at the history and look at what happened here, when Reagan was in office, it started out with those 50 corporations. And by the time George H.W. Bush came into office, we were already down to, 25 and then 6. And it just was a downward spiral, because at that point it was like, oh, okay, now we can just buy up all these other people. There's no limit to how
Hmm.
many corporations and how many news centers we can own. We can just buy them all, and let's just be this one monolithic voice. And there needs to be something that's done about that, because things like this happen. Now, Gretchen, I'm going to do a pop quiz for you. Are you ready?
Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to see how accurate you are with the New York Times came out recently with an article about how people just didn't understand what was happening with COVID and
Oh,
the
okay.
amount of people, how many people actually need to be hospitalized. So,
Hmm.
what are the chances of somebody with COVID being hospitalized? And you can go anywhere from 0% to
Okay.
100%. Someone gets COVID. What are the odds that they're going to be hospitalized?
I would think I would think it would be somewhere between like 8 and 10%.
8
That would
and
be my
10%.
guess.
Okay. So that's the category that I think was
Yeah,
mostly
that
the
seems
same
right.
between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. So 14% of Democrats said that, 15% of Republicans, and 13% independents said that.
Oh,
The actual
okay.
number is somewhere between 1 and 5%.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
it's actually pretty low. And that's actually including all of the older people. So if you get rid of that, the number's really low.
Really low.
But when you look at the stats, 41% of Democrats thought it was 50% and up.
I mean,
50% and up.
did 50% of your friends go to the hospital? Like,
Right. Well, that's what they thought. 28%
wow.
but even Republicans, 28% of Republicans thought that, and 35% of independents thought that. Now,
Wow.
the only people the people who got it
That's
right, the 1 to
crazy.
5, 26% of Republicans got it right, 20% of independents got it right, and 10% of Democrats got it right.
Okay.
And actually, it was probably the most interesting thing to me was the people who said 0% or less than 1, basically, Democrats said 2, independents said 3, and Republicans had 4% say that that was the case. So actually all of them were pretty
0.
much the same. So it was near 0 to 1%.
Wow.
Now and I think it's funny to me because when you listen to the media on the left, they say that Republicans are all anti-science and they don't believe it exists and it's this huge thing. It was only 2, 3, and 4%. They're all within 1%,
Yeah.
which is a margin of error. So I don't think many people are believing that it just doesn't exist.
Right.
But it's crazy to me that overall 40% of Democrats and 28% of Republicans thought that over 50% of people who got COVID must be hospitalized.
That's
It's just nuts.
crazy.
But
That's a huge number of people.
right.
That's wild.
I don't think it's not a surprise to me based on the way the media covers it. And that goes back to what I was saying in the opening monologue, is that it's all about, what's going to sell. It's how do we keep people engaged? Because like you said, if you actually watch the news throughout the
Yeah.
day, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
When you watch Rachel Maddow, it's her talking about collusion. When you watch Sean Hannity, he's saying the Chinese Communist Democratic Party. It's just the same stupid
Yeah.
things. They're both Maddow and Sean Hannity say are just so frustrating. Now, there are news people throughout the day where they, have some actual news, but in general, it's like, all right, how do we take this little bit of information that's out there and make it last 24
just
hours?
Stretch it. Yeah, that's what they
Stretch
really
it
are
out.
doing. Yeah. Yeah.
CNN
well, and I think
was
too,
the
it's
first.
like when you're, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say CNN was the first 24-hour news source, and now we have like 8 of them. And so
Yeah.
now
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
all competing. It's not only do you have to figure out 24 hours of news, but how do you get more people to watch you? And if you can make people afraid, whether that's Fox
Yeah.
News making people afraid that immigrants are going to take over the U.S. and jobs, or whether that's CNN saying that you're going to die of COVID and Republicans want to kill you, that's what gets people to tune in and say, yeah, I'm
Right.
going to get involved in this, and I'm going to keep watching you because I hate those nasty Republicans and those nasty Democrats too. And it's all pitting us against each other. And it's
Yeah.
just so unbelievably frustrating to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when it comes to stuff like, well, even just COVID, I mean, NPR usually does like an update every day about numbers in the United States and the world. Like, and BBC usually does a larger commentary on what's happening in other countries. And I think that's really important because I think that's not what we're getting on our in our news media because they're so focused on us. But it makes you realize that everybody's having the same problem and we're not kind of dealing with this alone. The one thing that I think has helped me kind of get the right information when it's come to the COVID is that Pennsylvania has an app that breaks down COVID numbers by county and I think even by city, so that you're seeing where COVID is more prevalent and even deaths. And I think actually, whenever I said 8 to 10%, I thought I don't even know if this is accurate, like if it's too high or if it's too low, because I haven't checked the app in about a week and a half. After I got my COVID shot, I was like, I'm free. No, I haven't. Didn't really think that, but I did stop looking at it as often as I did. But I wonder how many other states have that and how many people have done it. I know that a lot of people were like, I'm not doing that because then you'll have my information and then I don't want you to have my information. I was like, they already have your information.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I did get the vaccine, and I still they had UPMC keep sending me reminders to let them know that I got it, and I haven't done it yet because, in general, I think when it comes, I want people to know the least amount of information possible about me, and I know I just said it on a podcast here, so anyone listening would know. But in general, I don't want my information written down, and so I think I just don't want people to know this. But I will say this is the part too that frustrates me with COVID. I was talking to a friend of mine who tends to lean liberal, not progressive, liberal, and was pretty frustrated with the way the media has covered things since Biden's got into office because we actually are killing it. Like overall, we have done an amazing job. I think over half the people who are open for vaccinations have vaccinations. We had talked about this before. West Virginia was leading the way for a while. There's so many good things happening with the vaccine rollout in America. And I think there are, I don't want to make this a vaccine thing because there are people who have serious considerations to think about. There's all these things where people have to make their own choices, but overall, we are doing better than most, if not all, of the countries in the world in this vaccine rollout. And I will be the first person to talk about how much Donald Trump's way of talking about the vaccine in some ways,
Mm,
and some of the things he did, they were just, he was never presidential about what
no.
he was saying. But he did do some good things with the vaccine rollout. And now Joe Biden, it's every politician. This isn't a Joe Biden thing.
Yeah.
But every politician wants to take credit for what they didn't do good, and they want to give blame for what they didn't do that was wrong. And we are leading in this vaccine rollout. And I think that that's one of the things that bothers me when I think that if the media would have covered Trump fairly on the left, and this is not Fox News. That Fox News was way too easy on him.
Mm,
But on the left, if they would have covered him just straight and said, here are the things that he's doing well, and here are the things that
our
he's
issues.
saying these
Yeah.
things that sound ridiculous in these issues, I don't think there would have been much of a change in who voted for him. And in fact, I personally think that there would have been more people voting against him based off of that, because when you hear only the negative things, but you see around you, okay, well, actually, wait a second, not all my friends are dying from COVID. And we do have a vaccine coming. And I thought these things were supposed to take 3 years.
Mm,
And, the media is saying, no, don't, he didn't do anything good. But he was president, and he, happened to be there when it was happening. And I think that if you would have just looked and said, okay, let's, this is what I have, whether it was Obama on Fox News or Trump on any of the liberal stations, and this goes back throughout all the presidents, just go after them equally. I want
yeah.
Fox News to ask Donald Trump hard conversations and hard questions, just like I want CNN to go hard after Joe Biden, because these people are leading our country. There
Hmm.
are things that they're going to do that, I think if you look at Trump's history, there's a lot of liberals who would be, potentially happy to see what he did in prison reform. Very small things, but it was better than
Hmm.
some of the other things that happened. And if you
Sure.
look at conservatives looking at Joe Biden, I mean, just you can he it's so nice not to have someone who's fighting up there every day. And
I know.
he still says things that are like
Yeah.
frustrating to me as a
Yeah.
president. Like I think that Trump has now set the bar so low for what you can and can't say as president.
Yeah.
And now Biden has kind of slipped into this whole like, well, I'm not as bad as Trump kind of thing. But at the core of it, you can listen to him and go, all right, I'm
Ah,
not as embarrassed most of the
he makes
time.
full sentences and isn't yelling at anybody.
I would I actually, I'm going to bite my tongue and move on from that. And I think this is the thing though, at the same time, that's where I want CNN to go after him for calling
Yeah.
Republicans Neanderthals. And,
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing where like Trump may have done it in a more vocal way, and his Twitter feed looked
Sure.
like a teenager. And it was very
Yeah.
frustrating to me. But hearing someone like Joe Biden in office saying the Neanderthals in the Republican
Yeah.
Party are killing people, and when you look at the actual stats with states like Texas and Florida, 2 months ago when they opened up, we heard that was going to be the end of it. All these things were going to be spiking.
Mm,
Everything was going to be terrible. The world was going to end. And those numbers have continued to go down. And we have
hmm.
problems in places like Michigan, which
Hmm.
has been locked down the entire time. And so that's the part
Yeah.
where I want the news media, and this goes back to journalism. Like when Trump goes up there and it says offensive things, it even gets down to the point of when you talk about law and order. I saw a really good documentary about why there's a lot of racial backing behind when you say that there's like a real racial talking point there, and you're trying to kind
Hmm.
of.
Yeah.
I personally don't think that's why Donald Trump was saying it. I don't think he actually cared
He
much
probably
about
didn't
history.
know.
I don't think he
Mm-mm.
knew about it.
Mm-mm.
But someone around him should have been saying, "Hey, this is why that's not good. This is why you should be changing what you say."
Yeah.
And so every time he said something like that, I just got frustrated. But when I hear Biden doing things and saying things like that about Republicans, it's just the same. These are
Yeah, it just
presidents of the
seems
United
like
States.
these are, yeah, there has to be a standard. And I think the standard just took a nosedive and now everybody's just playing the game. And I don't like it at all. So anytime I would hear it, I would just go straight past it. I don't even want to hear it anymore. It just seems like this macho man kind of talk. And I don't like that in general in everyday life. So I really don't want to see it from the president of the United States. It just seems counterproductive. It alienates people. It makes people not feel like they belong. And it can't it was disheartening for me because he came out saying, I want to be everybody's president. I want
Mm,
and it's like,
mm.
yes, that's what we want. That is what we want. We
That's what I
want
want.
somebody that's just going to be here for all of us. You're going to do the job that we hired you to do.
Yep.
and there's not going to be any drama. I think everybody was so sick of the drama every day. It just was exhausting, and it was just things happening one after the other, and you couldn't even keep up with it. So I think having him do that and saying that really just was disheartening, and hopefully it was just a slip, and we can count it up to him just being an older guy that's just had a moment of, you know,
I
a
hope so. But
release. I hope that that was what it was.
I think it's
Fingers
interesting
crossed.
because like it's I will defend Biden for everything he does well, and
Well, right.
I will still defend Trump for things that he did well. And
Hmm.
I think that's the thing. If I'm talking to someone who I tend to be able to have open conversations with people who don't talk in talking points. If all you're saying
Hmm.
is what I hear on Fox News or CNN
Yeah.
as like the talking points, I know I'm probably not going to be able to have a rational decision with you. But there are good things and bad things that all presidents do. There's no one
Hmm.
that's lined up on one side. And bad to me may be different than bad to you. And it's all about
Sure.
trying to figure out what's happening.
Hmm.
But I think the standards are so different. And getting back onto the topic of
Yeah.
the news and the way we cover people, you know, everything that's happening up in, I mean, there's so much going on right now. There's so much happening with shootings, with the Derek Chauvin trial, all of these
Mm,
things. And did you hear about, I can't think of her name right now. The woman, she's the Maxine Waters, who went up to Michigan yesterday to march next to the protesters.
no, I didn't.
This you probably won't if you listen to mostly liberal sides of things. She went up there and was marching with protesters and said, it basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but she said, if we don't get the outcome that we want from this trial, you're going to have to keep getting in people's faces and telling them that it's wrong. And so she is a sitting congresswoman who is
Mm,
going and saying, keep on doing what you're doing, keep on, you know,
protesting and mhm.
not in the, she was saying more than protesting, get up in people's faces, but she was actually calling for if it wasn't a first degree murder indictment or charge. So if he didn't get first degree
Oh,
murder, then we should keep. He's not even being charged with that. So
no, he's
right
not.
there, we have a sitting congressperson who's saying if
That
we don't
isn't.
get an
Yeah.
outcome that we want, keep on doing this, which is kind of like incitement of a riot. Which, let me be very clear about this. I am not saying, like a lot of the people on the right are saying, that, you know, kick her out of Congress and she shouldn't be allowed to speak
Mm-mm-mm.
and all
No.
this. You look at, though, someone that like a Marjorie Taylor Greene and a Lauren Boebert, who are two Republican congresswomen that I don't like what they stand for. I
Mm-mm.
don't like that Marjorie Taylor Greene was a QAnon person. I don't like that Lauren Boebert is just kind of offensive
She really is. Yeah.
in general. But that gets covered on CNN, but not Fox News. No one on
Hmm.
Fox News is talking about how crazy Marjorie Taylor Greene is because they don't want to alienate any of their base. And no
Hmm.
one on CNN is talking about how crazy it is for a congresswoman to say, keep rioting unless we get a murder charge that isn't even on the dockets, which at the very core of it,
Hey,
there are going to be
man,
people who say, we didn't get first degree murder now. That's what we wanted, even though that's not even what's on the
that's
table.
not what they're. Yeah.
Right. And so like I want, and this what it all goes back to, is I want the media to be able to say, here is the information, not, you
Hmm.
know, this person is a terrible person. They are a racist. This person hates America. Here is what this person said. And here's the
Hmm.
context of how they said it. And here's the whole clip of what they said. Now you decide if you want to vote this person into office again or not. And so whether that's Maxine Waters, you know, the Matt Gaetz, which I'm gonna say this about Matt Gaetz. Uh, I don't think I don't know anyone who likes Matt Gaetz personally. I don't know any of my conservative friends who liked Matt Gaetz, and
No.
it's really frustrating as someone who tends to be conservative to hear things like, well, you know, we have this crazy person, but you have Matt Gaetz. And it's like, I don't claim Matt Gaetz. I don't like Matt Gaetz. He's always seemed like one of those arrogant people who came from a lot of
Yeah.
money, and he's got this like just this I should be here because I have this kind of power. And he's to me, has
Mm-mm.
been a terrible congressperson. He's only been in it for
Yeah.
himself. And I don't like him. And most of my
Every time he
conservative
opens his
friends,
mouth, he like incriminates himself even more. Like,
I mean, he's
dude,
just
stop talking.
right,
Just stop talking.
right.
Where's your
But
lawyer right now?
yeah. And I mean,
Yeah. Yeah,
it
he's a
looks like he's
mess. Yeah.
guilty. We'll see.
Yeah.
I still do
Yeah.
believe in due process. So we'll see what all happens. But it
Yeah.
seems like an indictment may be coming. But do
Yeah.
not put any conservative in with Matt Gaetz. And when you look at like Twitter and when you look at all these places, it tends to be this back and forth where it's like, Okay, so, well, Biden said this. Well, yeah, but now I'll do Trump. Talk about what Trump said. And they'll be like, well,
Right.
yeah, but then Biden said this. And it's like, no, can we just say that when Biden says Neanderthals, let's
It's
condemn
not
that?
okay.
And
Yeah, let's not do
it's not
that.
okay. And
Yeah.
when Trump talks about I don't, there's 8,000 different examples
I
of,
was just
just
gonna
look
say,
through
can
his
you
old
pick?
Twitter. Well, I guess you can't anymore, but look through his Twitter and just go, man, a president should not be doing this. Let's condemn
Yeah.
how he looks like a teenage person on this Twitter feed.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
condemn both those things at the same time. And
I think
unfortunately,
that's it too. It's like, why can't you have more than one? I think people try to put everybody in boxes, and it's just not. That is also counterproductive because you're not listening to people then, and a lot of people will just totally push somebody to the side and say, well, you believe this, so you can't possibly think this. Or if you believe that, you can't possibly think this. And it's like, I can hold two viewpoints on two things at the exact same time. And I
it's
don't,
crazy.
yeah, it just seems, it's a way to shut people down and delegitimize someone. So you see this a lot on social media. And I think it really comes down to how that person views people with other decisions that are, their decision making process, and how they look at other people that have different viewpoints. So I think it says a lot about other people's consumption of their media, and how you can tell where people are getting their news from simply by the way they interact with you. So I think a lot of people, they get into their rabbit hole, like you were saying, like people just kind of get down their own little rabbit hole, and then they have very little care for anyone else's viewpoint if it differs from theirs. And I know that it's like just been the last like few years that I have really tried to not dismiss someone simply for having a different viewpoint than me. And we all kind of, and I was saying this earlier, like we go through ebbs and flows. Like you get on social media and you really want to like be the fighter, and you want to like just stand for something, and you feel all empowered, and then the second someone like challenges you, you just kind of lose it because it feels so
Yeah.
personal. So I feel like there's a moment where you have to kind of look inside yourself and say, is this really what I want to show the rest of the world? Because this is not who I am. And I went through that. And it's like, I am this super bubbly person. And people were like, whoa, you are like going at it. And I'm like, dude, that is not at all who I am. And so I had to really step back and pay attention to really who I was, and pay attention to how I was putting myself out there. I would like actually to say, whenever we're kind of talking about our news consumption and how mine has changed, I started listening to when I got kind of over Rachel Maddow. And so I started listening to a site called The Best of the Left. And so it was a podcast where they would pick from left leaning articles or left leaning news stations, and they would just pick the best. So it was segments from these podcasts or whatever. And through that, I found David Pakman. Shout out David Pakman. And I really do enjoy his podcast. And the reason that I enjoy it, I don't actually agree with him 100% of the time, but I enjoy his viewpoints. He's an economist. He was an economist he went to school for. And I think he's just really brilliant when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I love the way he doesn't pull punches with whoever's in office. He's talked a lot about Joe Biden and the problems, and he's really frustrated with the news media right now too. So it's been really interesting to hear his commentary on his issues with the media, and saying like it is really important to look at smaller entities like us and like him, and smaller podcasts and independent media, because you're going to get less of the talking head syndrome and more of people who, and you're still going to get bias, of course. And I look at him as, and he actually even said this like a couple weeks ago, which I thought was so perfect because it's really embodies what I think of his podcast. It's like the topping on the pizza, or it's like the spice on top of your entree,
Hmm.
right? So you're having all these different media that you're consuming, and different things, the way that you get your news and history and all these things, but you're not just consuming the thing that is so like you. So then you are getting more of an education rather than just pumping yourself up with hate and anger and discontent with the other side.
Yeah, I think it's so important to not just listen to the different news sources, but when you see something in the news, this is kind of going
Hmm.
into what's next and what I think we should be doing.
Yeah.
I think we got to start thinking about ourselves like we're back in high school again. And in high school,
Hmm.
we always were told, Wikipedia is not a real source of information. You can't quote
No.
Wikipedia. We have to look at news sources that if someone comes to me, one of the things I'll do typically when I meet someone, especially if I don't know anything about politics and they start talking politics right away. I don't care if they're
Mhm.
conservative or liberal. Typically, someone who's very open about talking politics either uh, doesn't really know what they believe or why they believe it. And that's, I think, the majority of people who are very open about politics. I think the wiser people tend to be a little more quiet. I tend to jump into politics and like to think I know what I'm talking about, but I think I'm a very rare exception to the rule. And I think if you talk to a lot of people, they would say I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I think what I do often is I play dumb at first and I find out why people believe what they do. So if someone comes to me and they're anti Trump or they're anti Biden or they're anti Hillary or whoever it is, I go, tell me about that. Why do you believe that? And it goes back to what I said earlier. If they're using talking points and if that's all they're using, I don't really value that opinion. And I think that
Mhm.
there are a lot of people that if they tend to agree, if it's someone, if I'm a Hillary supporter and someone comes up and says like, wow, Trump's terrible, like Hillary is the person I would have voted for. It's like, yes. And we just get into this like, oh, it's someone like me and you hate that guy. And so you and me are friends now and let's share why we love her. And it becomes that it's our own personal algorithm. It's the
Right.
Facebook algorithm in person. We're going to keep being around people who talk like we do and get excited about it and share with them. And we're only sharing that same information back and forth. And so I like to hear someone that maybe takes a little while to get it out that they know about politics, but those people tend to be the ones that are more reserved and in the middle and are
Mhm.
able to have conversations. What I think about myself that I like is the fact that I've had some very what other people would say are very difficult conversations or conversations with very difficult people, and I've been
Mhm.
able to have them because I enjoy actually listening to what other people are saying. And I
Mhm.
feel like if you listen to what other people are saying and have done your research, people aren't as confrontational. But if there are just two people talking and talking points, you know, your Republicans are racist
Mhm.
and Democrats are socialists and you hate America. If that's what you're saying to each other, you're never going to come to any kind of common ground.
No,
But the
which is
people that I
usually
know
what
that are
social media is all about.
right. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's starting to happen into real life as well. And
Mhm.
I'll share one example. Actually, when it was the time that it was during the election with Trump and Hillary, and I was out with this girl I was dating in Philadelphia, and one of her friends who I'd never met before was like, "Oh, Ray, I've heard so much about you. Like, great to meet you. Who are you voting for?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness, really? Like, we
That was big.
literally
Okay.
just met. Like, and she had a few drinks. I'm like, okay, this is going
Oh,
to
okay.
be
So she's just a little tipsy.
interesting.
Okay.
Well, no. I found out that was really. I mean,
Oh.
she was like that
Oh.
when she was sober too, but the alcohol didn't help. And I was like, well, actually, I said I don't really want to talk about that. It seems like it's probably not going to be a good
It's not
conversation.
going
And
to
she
be a
was
good
like,
conversation.
why are you voting for Trump? I was like, no, I didn't say that. I'm not a Trump fan. And she was like, were you voting for Hillary? I was like, no, I didn't say that. I'm not a Hillary fan. I didn't say any of these things. I don't, you seem
I
like
just
you
don't
have
want to
something in
talk
your
about
mind that
it.
you're looking for a right answer. And if I say Hillary, I'm pretty sure you're going to be excited about that. And we're not going to have a real conversation because you're just going to see me as one of you. And if I say Trump,
Mm,
then you're going to see me as the other. And if I say, I don't even know if I'm voting for anyone at this point, which at that time, that's
you
exactly where I
were,
was at.
yeah.
And she finally forced out of me and said, who are you voting for? And I was like, I think I might actually vote third party this year. And she was like, that's a vote for Trump. And she started like getting mad at me. And I said, look, I was like, I am not a fan of Hillary. And, I said, if it was someone else, and I think I may even at the time said Joe Biden, because at the time
Mm,
I would have probably voted for him.
yeah.
And I was like, if you would have taken Bill Clinton, I was like, I think he's a terrible human being, but he was a good president. He actually got
Yeah.
things done. There were a lot of
Yeah.
errors that he made in policy,
Sure.
but look, that's also looking back at the lens of history. And she was like, well, that's because you're a misogynist. And I was like, I can't win here. I was like, geez, I was like, there's no way, no matter what I say, it's going to be wrong here. And I was like, this is
Oh my God.
exactly why I didn't want to talk to you. So I went from being a racist when she thought I was voting for Trump to being a misogynist when I said I didn't like Hillary,
Oh
but I
my
would have
gosh.
maybe voted for like Joe Biden or Bill Clinton. And that became like I was a misogynist. So
Oh
anyway,
my
my point
gosh.
is, from that, I think that was the point where I started playing dumb, and
Yeah.
I would say, I like to hear what other people think. I won't lie, so I won't say like I don't care about politics, but I'll say I would
Yeah.
like to hear what other people think. What do you think? And try to get down and see what they believe. But I think we have to go back to real sources, and real sources are not our friends who
No.
listen to CNN and Fox News. Real sources are not Huffington Post or the Daily Caller, or any of these right wing or
Yeah.
left wing groups. Like, real sources are, let's take a look at a news headline, even in the AP or Reuters, and say, all right, let's look up where this poll came from. Who actually conducted this poll? Because if it's a conservative group, it's probably going to steer conservative. If it's a liberal group, it's
Yeah.
probably going to steer liberal. And I feel like that's what we need to do as citizens, because I think it really is. I can't express enough how frustrated I am with us as people not being willing to stand up and say, this is not okay. And I don't want to attack all of my fellow Americans. And that sounded very,
Yeah.
I think, political. They're my fellow Americans. But it's really disgusting to me to see us attack each other. And I
Yeah.
love having conversations with my friends who are Black. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was transgender after our conversation last week, because I wanted to see. I said, if you listened, I want to know, did I say something offensive? Is there something there that I could change? I want
Yeah.
to know what people think, even if I can't understand what it's like to be transgender. I can't understand what it's like to be Black, but I want to be able to find out why what it's like by talking to people and talking to
Yeah.
people who've lived this.
Yeah.
And when I talk to people who have lived it, my friends who are Black, I don't know any of them who hate cops and want them to die, and are
No.
that's not the majority of people. When I talk to my friends who are cops, I don't know any of my friends who are cops that are racist people. Now, I will say, we talked about this earlier, I do think there's something to be said about certain cops not having their job. I mean, clearly what happened with
Yeah.
the guy this week, or I guess it was a couple months ago, but the lieutenant who was pulled over and pepper sprayed. If you
Oh my
look at
gosh.
that
Yeah.
situation, and this is kind of what I'll wrap up on, because I think this is one specific instance. When we look at what happened in that instance from the media's perspective, you watch Fox News and it was all about, well, he didn't get out of his car. He should have just listened. When I talk to friends of mine, that it's tough when you talk to friends of yours who are Black, who talk about how afraid they can be of cops and
Yeah.
what they go through on a typical traffic stop, and what is going through their mind. So when I look at that, I don't see it as, wow, he's way out of bounds and he shouldn't have
Yeah.
like held his door closed. If someone's coming at me with a gun drawn and yelling at me, telling me I'm going to ride the light, that is a
Yeah. The
code word for
lightning.
dying.
Yeah.
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 I'm going to be afraid. And I talked to you about this earlier. When I was 16 or 17 years old, I think it was 17, I had a cop, I was a sheriff's deputy, who pulled a gun on me for pulling into the wrong parking lot trying to get to a driving range. A friend and I were in the car. And he immediately came out with a gun drawn, made us show him his ID. I don't think any of this was
Oh my
legal, but we
God.
also didn't have any kind of recourse. Like, I wasn't going to call the cops, because it was the cops to me. But there
Yeah.
are certain people who should just be out of law enforcement. And I watched that video and I see a scared Black man who is clearly scared because he was in a country road followed by a cop and has seen everything that's been happening in the news. I can understand why he's afraid. I
And
can also
and why he
understand,
drove to a really well lit
right,
location, because
really well
he
lit
was like, I
location.
need to be somewhere safe. Yeah. And he was
And I
right.
look at what
Jeez, he
happened with
was
the
right.
cops. I will say that in general, cops having some fear, I think, is warranted.
Yeah.
If you look at it, I mean, this week we talked, there was a guy up in New York, there was a cop that got bleach thrown in his eyes and Molotov cocktails thrown from a car. There was a trooper that got shot in the head this week. There are all these things that make cops, rightfully
It is a
wary.
really dangerous. Yeah.
But in that situation, it's interesting. The media went to a white man pulling a gun on a Black man, turning it into this race thing. Fox News was downplaying the fact this Black man should have just got out of the car and listened. And it was
Instead of
actually a
just
Hispanic
talking
man.
about it. Yeah.
Instead of
Like
talking
the
about it, and it was a
realities. Yeah.
Hispanic man who pulled the gun out and was yelling. And if you look at the video and actually watch it, the white cop seemed to be way more reasonable. And if it was just him, and I talked to friends of mine who were Black, and they said same thing. It's, if it was him, it probably would have been calmed down. It wouldn't have been a big deal. But that
Yeah.
older cop was the one causing the problems, and he should be fired. And I
Yeah.
think, is it because he was racist? I don't know. He seemed like he was racist, But at the very minimum, even if he wasn't a racist guy, you should not act like that and pull a gun out. You don't need to do that.
No.
And so he should be gone. And I think the conversation can
Insane.
come to training and why
Yeah.
are there only like 2 weeks of training when
Yes.
cops start using guns. We can talk about
Yeah.
why cops can be, I mean, maybe it's an age thing. That guy has been a cop for probably 20, 30 years versus the young guy who was handling it
Right.
better. So at what age do we say, hey, take a year sabbatical like we do with teachers and say, take some
Sure.
time off and make
Well,
sure
I
we're
don't
getting
even
mental
mean like
health?
mental health counts. Like you and I are on the
Right.
same wavelength. But yeah. Well,
Exactly.
actually, it's
There's
kind of
all these
interesting.
things.
Yeah, when you were telling this story to me earlier, I actually remembered my ex-husband had one time we were driving up into our local shopping plaza, and he got pulled over for speeding, and he had an Obama sticker on the bumper of his car, the back of his car, and the cop came up, gave him, is like, "Give me your license registration." He was young; he's a really young guy, and he went back to his car and got the information, whatever, came back, he got off the ticket. He always got off tickets. I don't know how he did that every time.
Hmm.
But when the guy was walking back to his car, he like looked at the bumper and he turned around and came back and he started grilling him about why he voted for Obama. This is a
Mm.
guy standing there with a gun. He's like, and I remember him saying, I took it, I handled it poorly. He's like, I was like, I'm really uncomfortable with this conversation. I'm very uncomfortable. Can you please go back to your vehicle? And like James was just like, please leave. Are we finished? Can I please go? Can I please go? And ended up, calling the chief of police because he knew him and
Mm.
basically was like, this happened, which was really crazy. But at the same time, it's like I mean, he felt uncomfortable in that moment. And it was probably very innocent from the view of the officer, but really, really inappropriate and not at all his place. And the guy was like, I just want to know. I just want to know. And he's like, I'm really, really uncomfortable. But you almost wonder, and it puts you into that mindset of, I'm a white man sitting here with a white man having this conversation. If I were any other kind of minority, a woman, a black woman, a black man, how different would this conversation go? Would he be comfortable doing this to me if I wasn't a white man? So these are all things that we were like trying to figure out like after the fact. And it really shook us both because we were like not understanding what in the world this guy was even thinking. But it goes to like training, like you were just saying, why did he feel that that was an appropriate thing for him to do in that moment? Why do what kind of training are they going through for a traffic stop? What is something like this and the
Right.
repercussions of doing something like this? So, yeah, when you were saying about it, I just had that memory kind of flash back at me. And it really does go to training for me, for cops. And I think
Well, I think it's
even this is like kind of off.
training,
Yeah.
accountability, and
Yeah.
also too mental health. I really, we talked about this
Absolutely.
when Hannah was in the show. Mental health
Yeah.
does not get enough support in
No.
this country, and
No.
I do think that, I mean, number one, I think if you talk to most conservatives, the most moderate conservatives, they would say that that's ridiculous, and I would say
Yeah.
that's ridiculous to yell at. So I don't care if he was talking about. It was a Hillary bumper sticker, a Trump bumper sticker,
Yeah.
whatever. Just keep it. You're a cop. Just do your job.
Do your job, man. Stay in your
But I
lane.
think that goes back to there are. I mean, I have friends who are cops, and I
Yeah.
have the same. I think it goes back. I think if this is getting away from cops specifically,
Sure.
and again, this all goes back to. I mean, we're kind of going off topic here, but
Yeah, we are.
I think we talked about this earlier. Working in retail, I worked at Best Buy, and we always had these loss prevention guys, the guys that were in security. And there were some loss prevention guys that came in, did their job, watched cameras, and left and did a good job. And then there were
Yeah.
some who thought they were like the FBI. And so they'd get in there and
Legit.
be like, let me see your bag. Let me watch this. I had a guy one time as a joke. I found out after I left working there, I was talking to this customer service agent who told me the new security guy was like really intense. And I had bought a toaster oven for my grandfather. And I told her, I was like, watch this. So I walked out. And the guy was like, let me see your receipt. And I was like, no, because they don't have to. Like, actually, by
They
law,
don't
you
have,
don't
yeah,
have
you
to
don't
show
have
me your
to.
receipt. He followed me to my car.
Mhm.
He like called the police on me, which I didn't know. But later on, like the police actually came, and the girl from customer service whenever was like, "No, he bought that. Like, why wouldn't you check with us first?" But I think about that as like, okay, that is
Yeah.
typical. There are some people that come in and do their jobs and do it well, and I think
Mhm.
that's the majority of people. And there are people like that who need to get weeded out from loss
Yeah.
prevention at Best Buy as well as the police force. And I think that
We
again,
had a
this
guy
is a
like that at
completely different
Walmart too.
topic. The whole point of it though is the way the media portrayed it. If you're watching Fox News, it's the lieutenant's fault, and not everyone said that, to be clear, but like that
Yeah.
was the general consensus. This seems terrible, but he should have complied.
Mm.
And you watch CNN, and it's, well, there's those racist cops, and
Yeah.
none of that is going to lead to any solutions. And until we stand up as people and say this is not okay,
Mhm.
we're going to stop watching Rachel Maddow. We're going to stop watching Sean Hannity. We want people in there that are not like this. We want people in there that are actually doing journalism. It's going to keep being the same thing. And
Yeah.
eventually it's going to get out of control, and we're not going to be able to bring it back in. It's already been let out of the box. And I think the
Mhm.
the fourth estate has already fallen, but I think we can get it back. But we have to stand up as people and say, all right, if there's one boycott and one cancel culture I'm all about, it's canceling the fake news. I'm going to use that word on both sides. And that to me is all of this corporate media. So
It's just the echo chambers. Yeah.
it's those echo chambers. So
Mhm.
I think that was an interesting, it was a new style of podcast episode for us. But for
Yeah.
me, what's next? I think we should play dumb and find out what other people think as we start engaging with them, and research everything and go to real sources.
Yeah.
For you, if you could wrap it up in 10 or 15 seconds,
Yeah.
what would be your
More
way of moving forward from this?
for me, and it's really how media literacy. I want to get better at media literacy and doing a better job for myself. So I want to read more books on history. I want to consume more news that has more of a center leaning, more Associated Press. And I think I'm going to kind of probably follow your lead. And Reuters, I've always noticed, has been a good source. So I may purchase an online subscription
Ooh,
now. So I
fancy.
think
Maybe
these
we
is like I've been really proud of myself, and I think it's been our podcast that's really pushed me in this direction, but I feel like more people should do it. More people should have more a conscious decision over their media consumption and get off of Facebook, quit posting weird things and yelling at people through Facebook because it just does not do anything.
never going to change your mind. Yep.
No. Never going to change a mind.
And I will say, I think that when we talk about the podcast, again, look at all the articles that we looked up. I find it fun. I
Mhm.
know most people do not find researching news fun, but we need to do more of it, especially if you're going to
Yeah.
share it. I think that, like we talked about
Yeah. Oh my
before you
gosh.
post something angry on Facebook, there should be a little message that says, "Hey, are you sure you want to send this?"
100%.
I feel like when you share
A
news, there should be
delay.
something that says, "Are you sure that this is actually real? Did you do some research
Mm,
yourself? Is this out of your comfort zone?"
yeah.
But all right, moving forward, we're going to talk about last week, which is kind of a conundrum. But
Mhm.
last week, since we normally talk at the beginning of the show about what we talked about last week, we mentioned that we were talking with Dr. Jess Scott about transgender athletes. And I do want to make a clarification. Two things. Number one, first off, I love Jess. I feel like
She's great.
one of the things I like about this podcast, and in general, what I enjoy in life, is talking to people that on paper you would think that, okay, these people probably they're going to be like oil and water. And I look at myself as a straight white male who tends to lean conservative in some things, with which I think she said left of progressive
Mhm.
gender studies professor. I think that in paper you go, wow, these people, they're not going to get along. After the show, we are going to go shooting sometime. We talked about that. We're going to go. She's never shot a gun before, and I'm going to take her shooting sometime. And I think we may actually film it if we're up for it for the show, and see how that goes. But I really appreciate having her on. There was one part where I just want to clarify: we were both right. We were just right at different times. So there was a point where we talked about, just for listeners who had tuned in last week, there was a part where there was a disagreement about when, or the guidelines for transgender athletes in the Olympics.
Mm.
And I had said that it was 10 nanomoles per liter or under for testosterone, and that was the only requirement. And Dr. Scott had said that you had to have gender reassignment surgery, and she was right. But that was as of the 2004 Olympics, and in
Oh.
2015 they switched over to the new setup. So again,
Oh,
we're
that's
both
good at
right,
least.
just different times.
Jeez.
But
I mean,
if you're
that was a big moment where I was like, dear Lord, like, yeah. So, that makes me happy. I mean, it's still not great, but that does make me happy that that is no
it
longer
has
the
changed.
case.
Yeah, it is
Yeah,
updated. That's not the case
that's good.
anymore. So I just to make sure for clarification
Good.
for listeners. And every week we end with a one good thing. And I actually didn't discuss who was going this week because I have one good thing to go with. Are you ready for this?
Oh, yes, do it.
It's a weird thing. I went to the dentist. Actually, it was about 101 days ago, I can tell you, because my hygienist yelled at me for not flossing enough. And she was an older woman and she was tough and
Oh,
she like tore me down and she told me I needed to floss. So I got this app called Streaks that I use for things like working out and reading and all of these things. I added flossing on there, and Gretchen, this week, I hit 100 straight days of flossing.
good for you.
Thank you.
It,
100 straight days of flossing.
I love that. And it's so funny when it's 100 days of flossing, you could mean the dance move.
Oh yeah, I couldn't do that though. You're actually, yeah, you've never seen
Please
me
don't
dance,
do
but
that.
you would not want. Yeah, you would not want to see it. So
But
that's the one
100,
good thing this week.
that's a big
100
moment
days,
for you.
and there are
That's a
many
big
days
deal.
that I did not want to do it. Let
You
me
don't
just
want
be
to do
clear
it.
about that.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you know what, this all ties in. I didn't plan on this, but this all ties in. If I can floss for 100 days, anyone listening to this can research some
can too.
news they're about to share.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
all right.
I agree.
All right, Gretchen, thanks for being on
Thanks,
here
Ray.
again. Anything
It's
else you want to
great.
wrap up with?
No. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in and listening to Research the News. Next week, we're going to have Michael Gungor on, and we're talking about why people are leaving the church. If you're not familiar with Christian music, he's a very popular Grammy-nominated singer, and he had left the church. So he grew up in an evangelical church, left the church. Gretchen will not be on next week. She's actually off, and we have Caitlin Rohrer coming back on. Caitlin tends to be liberal. She's also a pastor who's now in a church. And I've been involved in church for about 10 to 15 years, but I haven't gone regularly for a couple of years now. So it should be an interesting conversation with a lot of viewpoints. And make sure you share the podcast. It's researchthenews.com. All the links are there for our YouTube videos, our Facebook page, and everything else. If you want to share it, that helps us out. It also hopefully helps people understand that we need to research the news. Journalism. Fourth estate. I'm going to throw out a bunch of buzzwords. I'm going to make my own language. We need the fourth estate to come back. I don't know. I feel like I should just wrap it up. I'll talk to you guys next week. See you then.